I now give the floor to the representative of Syrian Arab Republic.
شكرا سيدي الرئيس. أرحب بمشاركة.
I thank you, Mr. President, and I welcome the presence of Ms. Naledi Pandor, Minister for International Relations and Cooperation of South Africa, and I would like to thank her for presiding this important meeting of the Security Council and for the positions of her country based upon international law and the Charter of the United Nations. I welcome all those who have focused on the essence of this item on the agenda without deviating from this. I mean the Arab-Palestinian conflict and no other. This is the mandate and essence of this point. And this item, the Founding Fathers wanted to create the United Nations upon the basis of the principles of international law, and notably respect for sovereignty and sovereign equality of countries, and refusal to interfere in domestic affairs, rejection of aggression, of occupation or hegemony. The Founding Fathers granted the organization with a mission to achieve the ambitions of our peoples in terms of peace, security, development and prosperity. However, there were ill winds for our ship and its sailors. A handful of Western powerful countries have attempted to seize this ship of peace and deviate it from its course, and to transform it into a tool at the service of their agendas based upon piracy and hegemony. We have seen an increase in the United Nations since its creation in the number of crises, wars and aggressive practices, rather than seeing these crises, wars, conflicts and attacks decreasing. Our organization, unfortunately, has been something of a spectator with regard to many of these conflicts. This organization has been used to propagate false accusations or to present motives in order to legitimize invasions or occupations in many regions. The peoples of our Arab region have had the lion's share of these aggressive practices and artificial crises. One of the manifestations of this, with serious consequences today, after 70 years since the beginning of this conflict, is the Israeli occupation of occupied Arab territories in Palestine, Syria, and Golan, in the south of Lebanon. The United Nations, and particularly the Security Council, has been incapable of implementing the relevant resolutions which call for an end to this occupation. Given this backdrop and these challenges, many diplomats and interested parties are facing a quite legitimate question: what has become of this organization, which is today incapable of making sure that international law and the provisions of the Charter are respected and upheld? Is the role of the organization to be limited to crying over the victims of wars and attacks and occupation? Will this organization be restricted to paying homage to those suffering in the occupied Syria and Golan and other areas? Are they going to make these only into debates just to take up people's attention, to sow confusion and distract people from the real solution? Is it possible to accept that the Secretariat is indifferent when Representative Mladenov always talks about the Syrian Golan in his briefings without paying much attention to this? Are the guardians of the Charter those who are directly violating it or violating it through their tools? Have the provisions of the Charter been created for them to be applied to the small countries only, and those who are manipulated for objectives aiming to restrict the very aims of the Charter? Can we admit that the United Nations organization has just been a beautiful dream which is shattered now, which is over, and we should start to ask what the alternative might be? President, in our region, we have seen a new chapter opening in escalation of the Israeli actions, which have led to record levels of tension. The occupying Israeli authorities have carried out repeated attacks on Syrian territory and upon the territory of other neighboring Arab countries, in a serious violation of international law and the Charter of the United Nations, as well as the resolutions of this Council. Moreover, Israel, the occupying power, is continuing its attempts to deform the history of the occupied Syrian Golan, to steal its monuments and its wealth. to modify its demographic nature and its national identity, its Syrian national identity, by seizing land of resistant Syrian citizens in the Golan, to extend its illegitimate settlements, and to launch new occupation projects, such as that of the wind farms for energy production. The inhabitants of the Golan are forced to register land which they have inherited from their fathers and grandfathers in the Israeli land registry, with the risk of having this land confiscated if they protest. There are also the so-called local elections to appoint Israeli puppets. All of these are serious violations of international law and international humanitarian law, practiced by some with a set of double standards and hypocrisy. This would not have continued, this Israeli action, without blind support lent to the authorities, the occupying authorities, by known governments. These governments are responsible for the consequences of Israeli practices, therefore, and of Israeli crimes and violations. There was the American decision to recognize Israeli sovereignty over the occupied Syrian Golan, and before that to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to transfer the American embassy to Jerusalem. There were also the efforts to do away with the Palestinian question. All of this is a show of this support, and these decisions are null and void and have no consequence. They are decisions which show the disdain of international legitimacy. In conclusion, my country's government affirms that the Syrian-occupied Golan is an integral part of the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic, and the lines of the 4th of June 1967, with all the resources endowed upon this by international law. This will remain the priority of our Syrian policy and will be our lodestar. The government of my country reiterates its call for Israel to liberate detainees and all into Syria, and all others who are festering in Israeli jails. We reiterate our support to the rights of Palestinian people to self-determination and to restore their independent state across all their territory, with Jerusalem as a capital, and the right of refugees to return home under Resolution 194, and to allow Palestine to be represented in the United Nations.
Statement and